Hello and welcome to Green Shift, where we try to make sense of sustainability. I'm your host, David Austin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Victor Nian, founding co-chair of the Center for Strategic Energy and Resources, CSER. Today we have Isabella Suarez from Transition Zero. And Isabella is a policy analyst focused on climate and energy issues and leads Transition Zero's Southeast Asia work. And prior to joining Transition Zero, she was Southeast Asia analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, where she conducted regional research and stakeholder engagement. And she's also an expert advisor to the Earthshot Prize. So Isabella joins us today to talk about a recent report that they've just published on Singapore, the 24/7 carbon-free electricity, or CFE. They've mapped out some different scenarios comparing annual matching to hourly matching. As she's discussing it early on, she talks about the current greenhouse gas protocol, which guides how companies report their emissions globally, and the fact that currently companies will use something called renewable energy certificates, or RECs. So before we get started, could you give us a brief explanation of RECs, maybe a little bit more so we understand what they are and how they're being used today?
Yes, certainly. So renewable energy certificate, as the name suggests, it is a certificate that demonstrate that you are using renewable energy. Let's say you have an on-site solar installation, rooftop, or ground-mounted, or even integrated solar. You'll receive electricity from the solar generation, and so you are using green energy. So that's intuitive. Another alternative is that someone else may have deployed a large solar farm, or we call that grid-connected centralized solar, and this owner-operator, they send electricity to the grid. So you as a user, if you want to use that green energy, what you can do is you can sign up for a power purchase agreement so that you're buying the green power from that solar company. So that's also easily understood. You're buying the actual electricity.
But PPA.
PPA. So what happens if you do not have that kind of grid connection, or you cannot buy the green energy directly from the owner operator, or the owner operator wants to have a presence in the offset market? So that's where renewable energy certificate, or RECs, come in. So RECs is a way of offsetting. It is not a physical consumption of green energy. It is an offsetting mechanism. So what it does is that the owner operator says, okay, so rather than selling my electricity directly to the power market, I now get a third-party organization to certify myself or my plant into producing how many units of renewable energy certificate. Right now, one REC is equal to 1 megawatt hour. What you can do is you can list it. You can get the RECs certified, verified, and listed on an exchange. And then the companies that wants to offset their grid emission use, or fossil fuel electricity, they can buy this renewable certificate, which then give them the equivalent offset of the grid electricity they are using. So in that sense, if let's say really you have constraints to access green energy directly or indirectly, renewable energy certificates provide you additional mechanisms for you to meet your net zero target.
Well, thank you so much. All right, now let's listen to our interview with Isabella Suarez. Isabella, I'd just like to welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a really great opportunity to finally get a chance to talk to you in detail.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, David and Victor. I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
As are we. And first, I was hoping you could just tell us a bit about Transition Zero. What kind of organization is it? How did it come about? What is it that it tries to accomplish, and how do you fit into the organization?
So Transition Zero is an energy analytics and technology not-for-profit. We focus on building tools and data sets that support energy transition planning. We're headquartered in the UK, where a lot of our tech team is based, but we're really focused on building these tools that support low to middle income countries in energy planning, transparency of data sets, and all of those things. In the past, this has involved building data sets on things like coal assets, solar rooftops, and steel emissions. Over the last few years, that has sort of expanded to include energy modeling. And our focus now is really on building up what we call Scenario Builder, which is a no-code, accessible energy systems modeling tool. And the goal here is really to allow different stakeholders and different participants in the market become more familiar with the trade-offs of the energy transition. And our theory of change is that this transparency in data sets, this ability to model the energy systems more agilely, will support decision making, allow us to have more honest and like open-eyed discussions about what we need to do to transition our energy systems. So where I fit into that equation is I'm the Southeast Asia lead for our analysis team. So I oversee strategy and research in the region. In certain cases like this one, I also get to contribute to the research.
Okay, and the case that we're talking about right now is Transition Zero is doing a series of country-level reports on 24/7 carbon-free energy. More specifically, we're talking about Singapore, but what was kind of the motivation behind this delving into these country-level reports, and what were you trying to find?
Yeah, so the report that you're referring to is our 24/7 carbon-free electricity report. This is a series of reports that we're doing for 5 countries. We've released India, Japan, Singapore. Malaysia comes out this week as of the time of recording, and Taiwan after that. This is a report series that was commissioned by Google.org, and it comes at a time where there's a lot of conversation around greenhouse gas protocol, which guides how companies report their emissions globally. So currently, most countries today follow what's called annual matching, which means that they buy enough renewable energy or renewable energy credits or RECs over a year to equal their total annual electricity use. It's simple, I think has been a bit effective in driving new solar and wind investments, but it's also a protocol or a method that was developed in the 1990s, so long before today's data and digital tools existed. So right now, those rules that companies offset, like let's say nighttime coal use, or in the case of Singapore, gas use with extra purchases of daytime solar power or credits for that type of power. And I think we're reaching a time where it becomes really important for us to expedite the energy transition and the build out of renewable energy. And that comes with increasing credibility around the actual deployment, sales, and consumption of that renewable energy. Under that, greenhouse protocol discussions, on the other side of what we know as annual matching is a proposal called hourly matching. So this is calling for like a tightening of those rules so that instead of just aggregating up for it annually, in every specific hour of the year, you are tracking where your electricity is coming from and that it's coming from carbon-free sources. So this is a more precise way to measure what's really happening. And when companies are able to use that lens, the intention is that they see the gaps where there are hours where they're still relying on fossil fuel generation. And this helps them target investments in more flexible, clean solutions like solar, storage, and geothermal. And the thing that happens at hourly matching, there's the nice catchphrase of 24/7 carbon-free electricity, which is what we're exploring here. In this report, we were primarily interested in the degree to which hourly matching is supporting decarbonization and what those tipping points are. So the report goes from 70% of hours of the year with that clean, free electricity all the way to 100%. We kind of acknowledge that this type of tracking will be new, and you can't go like all the way to 100 right away. And so we are also interested in not just chasing that perfect score, but in improving accuracy and accountability. There's previous research on 24/7 CFE done for Europe and the United States that has shown that hourly matching is more effective than annual matching in reducing emissions overall and over time. As we know, right, like Asia's systems are very different from Western power systems are very different from each other. So in these like major markets where we're seeing a lot of interest for corporate decarbonization, a lot of demand for clean energy to fuel data centers, EVs, and other forms of industrialization and digitalization, we wanted to see like whether we would see the same effects. So what are the trade-offs and wanting to quantify that? So that's the intention or the kind of the story behind it.
Let me make sure I understand this and sort of break it down into more digestible bits. So I kind of get the idea that if you're doing annual matching, and this goes to like the procurement of big industries, is that right? They need their electricity, they buy it, and obviously if you're buying 1 year block at a time, you really don't have any control over, or not even any insight into where that electricity is coming from. I can see the benefit where if you're going to hourly, it's closer to being in real time look at, where the electricity is coming from. And of course, the more information, the better. It gives you an opportunity to match carbon-free energy with the usage at the right time. But to make this work, there needs to be a market for it. Is that right? And is that something, Victor, where you want to jump in?
Maybe a story. So if let's say a company wants to offset or wants to decarbonize, the easiest way, they will do is, improve my efficiency. So I save money, at the same time reduce carbon emissions. Then I try to look at what I can do with on-site generation, right? Whether it's going to be solar rooftops or wind, and likely it's wind, so it's usually solar on-site rooftops. And then I look at, okay, so what else can I do, right? But the thing is that if you apply today's standard, right, not the best practice, just say today's standard, as long as you can match your annual fossil fuel consumption or grid electricity with renewable energy or with any clean energy, then you can be considered as carbon neutral for your scope 2 emissions. Right. So that means indirect emissions from the use of electricity. And so companies are happy, right? I don't have to worry too much. At the end of the day, I just engage whatever consultants or do a calculation on a spreadsheet myself, look at all the electricity bills and say, oh, I'm good. Or I say, oh, no, I'm not so good. I need to look at some renewable certificates offset to make sure I'm carbon neutral. Which is fine. It satisfies some requirements internationally, and also it does help reduce emissions. You can also see this from the modeling in a way from transition zero, is that over the 24 hours, the grid emission intensity is not exactly the same. Especially during peak hours, where the peaker plants come in, or the peak time, or at times where renewables are not available, your grid emission factor can actually be quite high, and that is where we want to solve the emission hotspot in peak hours. And of course, during the evening time, well, the reason we call it solar energy is because it doesn't work in the evening. We don't call that lunar energy. So we only have solar during the day, but the challenge is that how do we then satisfy this notion of 24/7 carbon-free energy when there's nothing in the evening? So those ideas about storage or digitalization, moving the renewables around across the region, across the world comes in. But really, the idea is to address the part where we don't, so-called the facilities or the plant doesn't have access to renewable in its own time zone in time when the renewables are not available. And this is also where we want to aggressively decarbonize the industries or the companies with the notion of carbon-free energy. It's challenging, especially in the context of Southeast Asia. The reason why I say challenging is not just about limited resources or land space or all that, is that because we don't span across that many times. So if you look into the US, you look at China or the further up northern hemisphere, larger countries, you can span across different times. You do have access to renewable or solar energy across the day. So that gives you a bit of leverage to really shift renewables around. And if you look at Southeast Asia, the time difference is only around 2 hours, plus minus one. You draw a line in the middle of Southeast Asia. So the challenge is that how do we distribute renewable energy? Of course, there's hydro, there's not much wind, but there is wind. And then specifically looking at Singapore, we don't have solar, but we're thinking of importing from the region. But really what we try to achieve that, can we set the golden standard or golden practice in which our companies or the country can achieve 24/7 carbon-free energy with our own renewables, whatever amount that we can get out of it, and then through cooperation with or collaboration with the neighbor. So which is why this kind of work is important, because it does help set a benchmark. But then of course there are, if you hear this, right, there are a lot of challenges associated with achieving carbon-free energy. It is not just about energy storage; it's a whole lot about systematic or system level coordination.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Definitely, I think the challenge in Asia is vast, right? Like if you look at Europe, exactly as you're saying, the very interconnected countries span a few different time zones, same with the United States. But for this series of report, we're looking at like quite small, like more contained, I think, in terms of scope, is probably the word that I'm looking for. One area that I should probably clarify with this report is we're looking at 2030, so very near term. So we're really into the idea of like what can companies do and who are the drivers of decarbonization in the near term. So we're looking at 2030 as our marker year. And in 2030, for all of these countries, we're looking at just a subset of demand for 24/7 CFE. In the case of Singapore, we're looking at about 4% of total demand that we're projecting will come from commercial and industrial consumers who will participate in 24/7 CFE. So we're, trying to put a few constraints around what we're testing here. We're not assuming the entirety of the grid is going to be doing 24/7 CFE and all of these things. I think your point, David, like, yes, in the past, procurement was generally done through the grid, but you're seeing across Southeast Asia, across Asia, that there are other types of procurement options that are coming about to support corporates' goal of decarbonization. And this comes with the fact that corporates come with investment. A lot of them are willing to pay a premium on assured power, and a few more of them are willing to pay a premium on clean power. And so we're looking at that group of corporates. And when we're modeling this 24/7 CFE for that subset of demand, we are assuming that most of the cost of this investment will be on their balance sheet, will be because they've made the investment to be able to reach this percentage of power. But in reality, there's still going to be a portion of the power that they consume within a day or within a year that will still come from the grid. So we're really trying to look at like two sides of the coin in the system. We're trying to see like, okay, so if you're located in somewhere like Singapore, where you have limited access to carbon-free electricity because of the land constraints and all of these things, what is your next best option? So for this, we pull in interconnectors, which is a major strategy for Singapore at the moment. And we're seeing, okay, if that helps the grid decarbonize in a certain way, what's the impact of that on participating commercial and industrial consumers? How much more, how much less will they have to procure on their own? And this can be very different from a place like, let's say, Malaysia, which is another country that we've run. If you are building a data center or a factory or whatnot in Sarawak, where there's an abundance of hydropower, which is firm, clean power, then the dynamics change. And so I think it's just really important if we're looking at this group of corporates who are really driving investment in many areas, solar, wind, battery, data center, interconnectors. It's, I think, important to understand the trade-offs for them and what they're trying to prioritize. And with this report, we're actually trying to see, so if a lot of them are driven by decarbonization and they want to hourly match, what does that look like for them? And are there also benefits for the system in a way that they should be encouraged to support or enable 24/7 hourly matching?
Is there an example of the kind of commercial or industrial client that like ideally would have access to these kind of modeling, this sort of study, and be able to plan to think, okay, because of this, I realize I'm going to invest in this, I'm going to track it hourly? How ideally, how would this work based on the information that you've been able to provide?
I think more and more companies are getting like sophisticated about energy systems modeling. I think it just depends on which part of the power sector you're participating in. Of course, if you're like a developer or you're an investor, you'll do your own type of like financial modeling and forecasting for what the system in the future will look like. And you want that like level of information to be able to assure that you're getting a good return on investment. I think what we're hoping to do with this report, we didn't necessarily look at like prices in the market, although we have like a PPA cost there, the cost of investment. We were really interested in like the system level outlook. So for policymakers or government, you can look at this report and hopefully it gives you an idea that if corporates are coming to you and asking for hourly matching, there are benefits to allowing them or enabling this type of investment, especially if they're willing to make that investment. Because at a certain point in time where they're able to sell excess power to the grid, there's also benefits to the consumers because you're offsetting or you're removing a certain subset of power that might have come from like gas or coal, depending on the system. I think for corporates or folks who want to participate in this, it's really also important to highlight the costs. We're talking about like the limitations of solar. It's, only in the day, you're going to have to put in a battery, and that comes with additional costs. And at a certain point or a certain tipping point or a matching, I mentioned earlier, we were going from 70% to 100%. For Singapore, what we were seeing is at 80%, CFE, so 80% hours of the year being met hourly by carbon-free electricity, the investment cost is less than annual matching. So you're able to reap improved emissions reduction, about the same savings to the grid in terms of displaced fuel costs at 80% CFE versus annual matching. When you go beyond that, 80%, from 80% to 100% CFE, the cost to the C&I consumer or the corporate, let's say, increases massively, but it also decreases emissions massively. So it's just trying to paint that picture of like, these are the trade-offs of 24/7 CFE. There are a lot of benefits. The original premise of hourly matching is going to increase decarbonization is true, but it will come at a cost.
Yeah. So I think what I would like to follow up is really, if you look at hourly modeling or hourly matching, what it really helps is to review the cost of matching. So actually, in Singapore's case specifically, we have a liberalized power market, and ideally, we would hope that the price will reflect the cost of electricity production, and to make sure that our power market is always competitive. And so with hourly matching, we will also be able to hopefully see what is the true cost of meeting 24/7 carbon-free energy in the Singapore context. And actually it serves two purposes. Isabella already said, for government policymaker, this is an important you could call it a key performance indicator to see how efficient the power market is in facilitating 24/7 carbon-free energy. If it is not, what can we do about it? What kind of mitigation measures should we put in place? And then to corporations, I think this is also an indication where they will be more aware of the cost of achieving 24/7 carbon-free energy. And of course, this also helps them set a reasonable or a practical timeline for them to achieve 24/7 matching on 100% level. So of course, if you're an SME, trying to survive in this highly competitive environment in Singapore, cost is rising. So you'll be cost conscious, right? So in your day-to-day operations, you'll be looking at, okay, if I expected 24/7 CFE matching up to 100%, it's going to make my cost increase by 100%. I probably want to think twice. So probably today, I only want to do maybe 20% or 30%, and then go into 2040, 2050, when there are more clean energy available in the country, in the way that's aligned with the country's energy policy, which is to have more and more clean energy. And we also have a carbon neutral target by 2050. So by then, there will be hopefully abundance of clean energy or renewable energy available for me to purchase from. And then that might actually be easy and more cost effective to do, 24/7 carbon-free energy matching. So I think that's also possibly a misconception. No, we are never saying that you need to be 24/7 CFE 100% today. You can have a timeline. You can have a progress trajectory to say by 2050 you can be 100% CFE. It's not to say, okay, starting from today, 15th October 2025, you need to be 100% CFE. No, we're not saying that. And in fact, we don't expect the companies in Southeast Asia to be like that. Well, it may be in certain part of Southeast Asia, if let's say you really have access to a lot of hydropower, a lot of renewable energy, then yes, you could achieve 24/7 CFE straight away from today. But if you're you're a heavy consumer in Singapore, for example, refineries, petrochemicals, or semiconductor, or even data center, I think you will need the time, you need some runway for you to really achieve 24/7 carbon-free matching. Having said that, then what's the reference for you to monitor the cost trajectories, monitor the low carbon development? So this is where energy modeling will come in handy to actually give you that indication or give you that different scenarios in which you can kind of look out for.
I think that's a really important distinction to make. I think from what I can see in the discussions on the greenhouse gas protocol, there is this understanding that hourly matching is difficult. It's not going to happen right away. But I think what we're hoping to show with the sensitivity analysis going from 70% to 100% matching is that there are different types of benefits along the way. And what's important is with this like time-based granular accounting is that we are getting to more credible accounting standards, and we need to have that in place, and we need to exercise that muscle to be sure we get there. And the overall outcome is, strengthening both climate integrity and investor confidence in this type of decarbonization.
Isabel, was there anything that surprised you in the study after you did all the modeling? Was there anything about Singapore's situation that was unexpected to you?
I think, yeah, a lot of things actually. This was a massive undertaking for our team. Very, very interesting. I think that's one of the fun things about working at Transition Zero or any not-for-profit think tank that's looking at these really new ideas that could potentially become the future. You're really testing the bounds of your knowledge and trying to fit that into where you currently are and what we're hoping to get to. And I think this study was exactly that. So we not only modeled 70, 80, 90, the 95, the 99, the 100% CFE for Singapore. We also modeled different sensitivities around the role of interconnectors in Singapore's near-term decarbonization. The other thing that we were testing is we ran that, that scale of matching with different technologies available. So in the report, we call them technology palettes. So our first technology palette was just solar and wind, although Singapore has very limited wind, and batteries. So what's commercially available today? The second technology palette, we added the ability to use long duration storage. And then the third technology palette, we added CCUS, so carbon capture utilization technology on gas plants, as well as hydrogen or ammonia blending. So we're interested in seeing the role that these technologies will also play in increasing or decreasing costs and all of these things. And I think this gets to our earlier topic about like how can policymakers or people use this report. We are testing a variety of scenarios and technologies, and you can see how one compares to the other. So I think a lot of the interesting things came out of that. For instance, we found, or one of the main findings of this report is that for Singapore, at this level of demand that we were projecting and participating consumers that we were projecting, there was a very limited role for carbon capture and storage, as well as gas hydrogen blending to meet 24/7 carbon-free electricity. A lot of this has to do with the cost of these technologies. They are very expensive. And so in our modeling, we only saw them come up to meet the last 1% of carbon-free electricity, and at very, very small capacities, which meant that the dollar per megawatt hour of investment in these technologies was also very high. So one, that tells us that maybe in the near term, these might not be the technologies that will meet that first initial demand, but it also tells us the viability and the potential for solar plus storage systems. So we're seeing across the board, even when we told the model, you can build long duration storage, you can build CCUS, the model would still often choose to build or overbuild solar and battery storage and have that meet most of the hours of demand.
I wanted to ask about the battery storage, about what is the current kind of technology that you were using and how realistic is it? And what would that really look like in Singapore?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question because, with modeling, you are making a few assumptions. about what the future looks like, and it's really important to query that because some of these assumptions have massive impact on the results. Storage is one of them. So for storage, we're assuming a 4-hour lithium-ion battery storage technology. And Victor will correct me if I'm wrong. For Singapore, a lot of the solar is already being deployed by storage because it does allow you to maximize your investment, ensure that you're storing excess solar, and generally allow for more megawatt hours on that investment. For this study, it was being met by solar plus 4 hours of battery. Now, we did test long duration energy storage. We assumed that a 10-hour battery was available at a much higher cost. And this could have been one of the reasons why we didn't see too much deployment of that long duration energy storage, because 6 hours in the realm of modeling the 24-hour CFE is not much more time. But I think when we get into much more ambitious storage, like week-long, day-long storage, then I think the dynamics will change massively. And for a country like Singapore, those technologies I think will be really important. At present, they're still coming in at very high cost.
Well, I mean, for solar, Singapore is doing right now. I think our installed capacity is around 1.6 gigawatt. I mean, maybe around 1 gigawatt. So, in terms of what we can do, this is pretty much what we can do for now. And then, of course, there is a roadmap for 4 to 8 gigawatt. But then we have to figure out where do we have that kind of space to put a solar. Yes, some of the solar does come with energy storage, but I think there's still quite a few facilities, the small ones. I mean, for example, on the car parks of some of the small residential clusters, they don't really have batteries because they're just so small. And the interesting thing about Singapore is that most of our peak energy demand usually occur where there's peak solar production. So it's not too difficult for us to ingest all this solar energy during peak hours. And then there's never enough to go around. The country, Singapore is not that big, but compared to the amount of solar we can deploy, we are still pretty big. So there's not enough solar to go around. So, as far as now is concerned, we don't really have that much problem of, ingesting solar energy. It's just that the intermittency and unpredictability is what we need to deal with. So that's where also the other gencos needs to worry about, balancing the supply and demand, make sure life goes on. There's no supply gap somehow due to weather or whatever conditions. And of course, batteries has always been discussed in Singapore, even in the context of import. We also thinking about batteries as a way of not say backup, but as a way of cushion any sudden disruptions in the system, so that we don't create a kind of a split-second supply gap, because those are devils that will give you a blackout. So this is where we try to safeguard the grid and make sure we're resilient for the power sector. I mean, the challenges, but we're trying to work our best around it, and that's also we need. The detailed grid modeling is what we need to try to identify where are the bottlenecks. So same thing, if let's say really we go for 4-6 gigawatt of solar, and then if let's say they are meeting most of our future demand, peak demand, and that's also where, it's a good thing, but also we need to worry about what if they don't, where are the backups, what are the options, how to make sure we are resilient. That's also what I try to emphasize. That's what only modeling can tell you, what are potential impacts, consequences that you may be facing with all those decisions.
You'll find in the report that what the recommendation is that 70% round-the-clock carbon-free electricity by 2030 for Singapore entails building approximately 2.4 gigawatts of solar and 0.5 gigawatts of batteries. And this provides, the benefits that we were mentioning earlier in comparison to annual matching. So the cost of this investment is $16 million less than the cost of, CapEx and OpEx from an annual matching scenario. So that's 38% lower in terms of overall system costs with just this amount of solar and batteries. So that's, I think, more on commercial industrial side, but we were also talking about the system level benefits. So, as Victor mentioned, solar is coming in the hours of peak, and so it can also meet a lot of this demand. But what happens when you have the batteries is that you can store that, and then at certain hours of the day, if you have excess, or if the commercial industrial consumers have excess, they can sell it back to the grid. And what happens here is that you can displace a certain amount of fuel use or gas use on the main grid as well. And we were estimating that, for this, the potential savings are up to 185 million per year under the 70% CFE. But if you go higher onto the higher CFE scores of 90 to 100, that fuel savings benefit increases to 261 million per year. And I think this is really important because in comparison to annual matching, your fuel savings benefits is sort of capped at 218 million US dollars per year. So this, I think, gets to the point that Victor was making earlier, that like it doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to go straight to this, but as you go into more ambitious levels of CFE scores, the benefits do add up. And so it's working towards that.
Does that system level cost savings transfer to your average everyday consumer at all?
Yeah, I think this is where the market becomes really important. So we see in other countries like Malaysia or Thailand that you have these direct power purchase agreement schemes that they're trying to bring in investment, but it doesn't necessarily allow for revenue sales back to the grid or some level of distribution of benefits. And so that's really important in terms of market design. In the case of Singapore, it's a liberalized market. These should reflect in savings to the consumer.
That's good to know. I wanted to get to the interconnectors because I know that's just a big part of all future models, especially in Southeast Asia and especially for Singapore. You're not going to have many options unless we're connected to the ASEAN power grid or using these connectors to Malaysia, Indonesia. What did you assume for the model, and what did you learn about that?
Yeah, I think as you said, interconnectors features really heavily. I don't think you can talk about Southeast Asia nowadays without the ASEAN power grid coming up as a big, exciting thing that we need to watch out for. And Transition Zero has, I would like to say, been a bit ahead of that. We released an open source ASEAN power grid model that looks at dispatch rather than capacity expansion, so power flows, last year, and we're trying to update and get it to Scenario Builder at the end of this year, so it's much more accessible for people who are interested in interconnectors. So yeah, it was really important for us to reflect interconnectors in this study. So for Singapore, we have both an existing interconnector to Malaysia and the planned interconnectors to Indonesia, where you have a lot of focus being put on solar systems in being built in Batam, Indonesia, exporting clean power into Singapore. So we tested those two things. For the case of Malaysia, that interconnector is grid to grid. So it provides currently just more balancing power to Singapore. But in our study, we kind of assumed a more expanded role. So it's a 1 gigawatt interconnector. We assumed that it would be increasing its export to Singapore to about 500 megawatts per year. So the line was being utilized more versus something 200 megawatts, which is what it's currently doing. The impact of these interconnectors is ultimately the gas use in Singapore decreases, and also the base CFE score, especially if you're able to ensure that power through these interconnectors is clean, that increases. So let's say we ran a scenario, we ran many scenarios. We ran a scenario where Singapore does not have the interconnector to Indonesia, and then compare that to a scenario where a 1 gigawatt interconnector with clean power only flowing through the lines from Indonesia to Singapore is available. And what we found is that this increases the base carbon-free electricity score of Singapore from 2.6% to 10%. And that's a really, I think, substantial increase. And that's also reflected in benefits to the system. That's an additional 6 terawatt hours of solar-based power that is being provided to Singapore, which means you've avoided about 2.8 million tons of CO2 emissions annually as a result. So I think the study really affirms this pursuit of interconnectors. What I will say is that it's really important that these interconnectors expand access to renewables, because in some ways that's not an assurance, but it is quite affirming to see that, whenever I read these articles about, the monsoon power line or the EDP projects, that there is a conscious effort to ensure that it's solar, hydro, being imported into the Singapore grid.
What's next for Transition Zero? Obviously, you still have some of these reports to release, but once they're all released, what are you hoping to see happen next?
So the reports will be out, all 5 of them will be out in the next month. We have a series of webinars also planned in November that we invite your listeners to be able to hear more. And as part of that series, we have a lot of speakers who work on 24/7 CFE and practically apply that into their operations and their plans and their targets. And so it would be really interesting to hear, how this is being incorporated in practice. So we are engaging with those developers, those companies. I think the findings of the report has been helpful for them in trying to discern what the different countries, what the value or the trade-offs are for these different countries, because many of the organizations that are trying to pursue 24/7 are global in scope. They have options in terms of where they're going to deploy their operations. And so these overviews of the different markets and different systems, we provide, for instance, recommendations for what Singapore should focus on in the near term, which is accelerating domestic and international deployment. That includes like rooftop solar, floating solar domestically, and the interconnectors we talked about internationally or regionally. And in our engagement with these groups, it's talking through them and looking at what they are also advocating for and providing more information as they go into these rooms. I think with government, it's really also emphasizing or letting them understand and having a conversation about what the benefits of hourly matching is, and getting them to understand that putting in the policies and the mechanisms and also the technology to be able to track these type of matching is going to be really important, and in many ways probably in line with their smart grid goals and all of these things. So we're having different conversations around the board. It is at a time when, as we mentioned at the top of this, the greenhouse gas protocol scope 2 emissions are under discussion. So lots of moving parts and lots of things to look forward to.
Just real quickly, Victor, do you think that governments are getting the idea? Are they receptive to this message that hourly matching is important?
I think there is consensus that 24-hour matching is important, right? And of course, depending on where the priorities are, some countries may prioritize 24/7 matching over other considerations, and some may say, we still need to develop our economy first. So let's worry about clean energy later. From Singapore's point of view, I think having sufficient clean energy, maybe not 100% 24/7 CFE matching at the moment, but having enough clean energy to help us meet the 2050 net zero goal, that is definitely what we are pursuing. And of course, if let's say we can really set the golden standard to say, we can achieve 24/7 matching along the same journey when we walk towards 2050 net zero, I think that will be something ideal. And I think it is potentially achievable in the Singapore's context. But then again, the question is, how can we leverage on, for example, modeling tools to understand what it takes for us to get there? To understand the cost, to understand the infrastructure gap, to understand the supply gap, and then to also understand, we didn't really talk about that much on the demand side. How can the demand side respond to the supply constraint? That would probably be another topic that we talk about. I think we also need to be reminded where we are today. It's still pretty much 70, 80, 90% dominant fossil fuel. So the key to get to carbon-free energy is to mobilize everyone. You need to utilize our so again, that's where I always like to refer to our ecosystem approach. Bring in the right stakeholders, bring in the right actors to help you achieve that 24/7 carbon-free energy matching. It does come at a cost. but cost also brings opportunities, right? So in modeling, whenever we say, oh, there's cost to build this, there's cost to build that, there's cost to achieve whatever, actually, if you turn that around, that also means the opportunity to attract investment into your country to help you achieve your goals. Then that goes with technology supply chain partnership. Essentially helps you bring your economy up if you think about it from the other angle. So rather than thinking decarbonization all comes at a cost, maybe time to think about decarbonization comes at benefit, especially when it comes to 24/7 carbon-free energy, right? If the electricity price is going up because we are going clean, then maybe that's the time to look at alternative partnership models so that we can help bring the cost down. Modeling can give you a lot of insights, and that's where I would say, don't forget the power of energy system models.
What I would say is this study is really relevant and important because it shows us that Singapore has a lot of potential to attract investment in the energy transition, and it's already in areas that they are looking at. And this study is able to quantify what those benefits are. So let's say what we said earlier about interconnectors, like avoiding 2.8 million tons of CO2 emissions, that also comes with a reduction of gas fuel cost of $414 million a year. And Singapore already has plans for that 1 gigawatt interconnection with Indonesia. And this says this is a good plan. Keep going, keep ensuring that the proper stakeholders are involved, and let's design the system in the right way to enable not just benefits to the consumer today, but open the door to these new mechanisms and new ways of accounting that brings us closer to decarbonization and increases trust in this type of investment.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate this. And we will continue to post information about the webinars when they're confirmed and share everything. And really hope we can talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much for the discussion today.